And welcome to From Chains to Change. I'm Consuela. I have my colleague with me, Matthew.
Hi, good to see everybody again.
He's a devout vote member right here in Lafayette. And today we are going to be wrapping up our second season of From Change to Change. This is exciting. Um, and as we do and have kind of kept it up, we bring in our executive director and our deputy director, who are our leaders within this organization, to continue to give us insight on what is taking place in the criminal justice system and how it can impact you, your family, and your community. And so today we have with us our deputy director, Mr. Bruce Riley, who's located in New Orleans. Hey, Bruce.
Hey Sway, how's it going? Hey Matt.
Hey,
It's going good. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course.
Um,
Thanks for having me.
yes, yes. So the last time we saw you probably was about 6 months ago, and a lot has taken place. We have a new governor, and he's done kind of what we kind of expected him to do. So we just want you to kind of expound on, because you were at the Capitol like
Mhm.
probably 4 days a week, probably, and tell us what you saw, as far as what he did legislatively, the types of laws that he signed into law, and how they will impact formerly or currently incarcerated people.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I think that Governor Landry definitely hit the ground running. And, there's folks in Texas and Florida and other places that might be impressed with the amount of energy that he was able to spit out the gate. But partially, I think, because he came in after being Attorney General for 8 years. The new Attorney General was his old deputy. The new Secretary of State was the Secretary of State's old deputy, right? So there was a level of like already being there that made it a lot easier, I think, for him to come swinging in. As I think everybody remembers, he had all that endorsement from his team, his side early on. All that money was lined up. So many legislators were already lined up in his orbit. So when they came, I think it's interesting to always keep in mind the first thing that they did was they had a legislative session on the election stuff because they had to do the redistricting. Now, that's not something they wanted to do. That was something that the US Supreme Court and the court case against Louisiana had them backed up to doing. And so it kind of shows you that just when these people can seem as though they're all powerful and they can kind of do what they want, good, bad, or ugly, in the end, there are some limitations to what they're able to do. And similarly, people like Donald Trump getting convicted on 34 counts. I mean, sometimes we have to not believe that all is lost, and just understand that there is a lot of gray area, there's murky water, and it's helpful to have shows like this. They're helping to try to like simplify it down for people so we can not get caught up in the selling points, the propaganda, the distractions. We know that one of the big things that I think people of Louisiana, particularly Southern Louisiana, had front on the plate of things that need to get done was around homeowners insurance, right? And so the thing is, it wasn't something where there was just an answer to choose, right? It was a complicated issue. And I think everyone, probably on the Republican conservative side too, expected more out of what we got. Basically, we got like deregulation. If we just let the companies do whatever they want, then maybe we'll have more insurers around, and then maybe we'll get. It's a kind of a it's a pretty flimsy argument, right? And so we're gonna have to just watch it play out. Probably the negative, and here we are with apparently a big hurricane season on the way. So that is a lesson that none of us want to learn, but there's a good chance that we're going to go headlong into it. So that was another thing of like what was on the front of the agenda, but really didn't get done. And so then, of course, we know that the other thing that was high on the agenda was fight crime. Well, all of us, old, young, black, white, everyone in between, doesn't want crime, right? And here we are, people who've committed crimes and been through the whole system, right? I think what it really comes down to then is the disagreement about how one stops crime and or how one just kind of comes along after a crime has happened, like an early detection system and a quick apprehension or whatever the case may be. And they're very different things. And those of us who are walking along or raising kids that are walking to school or whatever, we're definitely most interested in prevented crime. If all you're doing though is like sitting back in the peanut gallery and watching crimes unfold and then wanting to like hammer down on the people who've done it, well, that's a whole different task. It's like the difference between your physical therapist after you break your knee and the EMT who showed up when you crashed your bicycle. Very different roles. One could say they both have a lot of value. Now, of course, we believe that the people that come after the fact, like creating more trauma in our lives and totally destroying us mentally, spiritually, physically, like that doesn't make us do less crime. It actually does the reverse. And the fact that many of us can resist committing crime is actually a testament to how much we love humanity and our neighbors and ourselves, and that we're like resisting all of this pain and torture. Like literally, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've physically been subjected to things that would be classified as torture. And if I explain them, people will be like, wait, what? I'd be like, yeah, that's American prison system. So that didn't make me more peaceful, didn't make me, more educated or anything in that kind of way. So, but what they made basically did, as I think a lot of your readers or viewers are aware, is they increased prison sentences, particularly mandatory minimums around fentanyl. And keep in mind that it's all about a trace of fentanyl, right? And we all know that kind of line about every single dollar bill has like some trace amounts of cocaine or whatever on it. And whether that's true or not, point being like microscopic amounts would then trigger these like 5-year mandatory minimums. That's the road we went down with the crack cocaine laws that destroyed Black communities, but got us nowhere on the drug war or safety for decades before we started to kind of inch back. But now we're pulling out the old playbook. Instead of people saying, my child is addicted to drugs and I want to address that, instead it was like, my child is addicted to drugs and I want to kill all the drug dealers. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, supply and demand. And so we all know how this operates. And we all know everyone who does have a drug problem has plenty of ways to get drugs. And if their drug dealer disappeared tomorrow, they will go find drugs like later on in the afternoon from somebody else. And that's just the way it works. You're not going to incarcerate. We thought we'd establish this. Um, so it's like, do people really believe in rehabilitation and getting people well? Like, I don't know. I'm sure there's some people who like, they just literally just want to punish harder. So along with that, they took the 17-year-olds who previously had been determined to be juveniles with a 5-year lead up to this implementation of 17-year-olds being juveniles. They didn't expand the juvenile system at all, even though they were going to inflate it by a full 25%. Like they like burst the seams of the juvenile system, the courthouses, the lawyers, the incarceration. And then they complained, and then they got their wish and they moved them back to being adults earlier this year. And then they go in and want more money to expand juvenile jails and prisons. And so that passed right now. There was no specific dollar amount attached to what they're going to spend, but they developed like kind of a spending team, so to speak, and a way to look at it. And they're probably going to be doing these things called lease revenue bonds, which basically means like I borrow the money to buy something, let's just call it a hotel on the waterfront property where everybody wants to go, and you invested in my hotel because you're like, oh, well, you're going to make your money back on all these tourists who are going to stay at your waterfront property. So that's the revenue is my leases, right? And so a lot of prisons and jails have been built by these what they call lease revenue bonds the sad thing is the people who are spending the money on the leasing is us, the public funds. But it's us paying the public funds plus the origination fees of the financial transaction, plus the bond money that with interest that goes to all the investors. And it's just a secret way to get around putting stuff on the ballot and saying, do we want to spend $150 million on a new jail or do we want to do other stuff? And those things lose. They've lost back in the day. And so they came up with new ways to fund these things kind of behind our backs. And then they still have to pay for it out of the legislative budget. Um, so so they did that with the juveniles. Now they're going to build more juvenile prisons so they can account for locking up more kids. So count on that. Meanwhile, in the grown folk space, what a lot of people don't realize is after we got all those clutch wins that really reduced the prison population from somewhere around 45,000 to about 27,000, like nearly half the population. Well, around the same time, Donald Trump and his immigration process was to like pick up everybody at the border and lock them up, right? There was no, oh, we're going to leave you out on what we would call bail. They call it parole until you get your hearing, right? It was just lock them all up. And then Louisiana, not even a border state, became the second most locked up place. We had about 10,000 people from the border here in Louisiana. Now, the federal government was paying lease money. They were renting cells from those sheriffs, and those sheriffs are cleaning up. They were getting something like around 110 bucks a day from ICE to detain people. So they were all about that border detention policy, right? Now, when Biden came in, no massive shifts in immigration policy. And as we know, he's about ready to, or maybe just did, implement basically the Trump policy. But in terms of the incarcerations at the border, fewer people started coming for one, for a lot of reasons outside of this country, right? And then for two, there was more people getting either deferred at the border or allowed to stay until they got their hearing, but like at liberty, because you haven't committed a freaking crime. All you literally did was said, I want to go live over there. And so that, guess what, emptied out our jail beds quite a bit by the thousands. And all of a sudden, people would be wondering, like, why did all these sheriffs come out of nowhere? DAs, everybody was like, justice reinvestment didn't work, right? They had all these complaints. They wanted to reverse everything. Well, it's right there in their pocketbook. And so now what they've done from the crime session and then beyond, is to get rid of parole. I think most people are familiar with that. So if you get 10 years, you're going to catch 10 years, basically. That massively reduced good times to the point where you can only get up to a year. And so if you're doing a short amount of time, you're probably not going to be able to like stack enough programming to get all that year. If you're doing a long time, you're going to, let's say you're doing 20 years, you're going to do 19 instead of 20. But, back in the day, you might have done, 8 or 12 or 15 or something, right? So the getting rid of parole, getting rid of the good time. But one of the more insidious ones that they did was around extending the probation period back out to 5 years. Now, years ago, it was 5 years. We got to reduce down to 3 years. And now they want to bring it out to 5 years and make it easier to revoke your probation. And also, we had created a system of what we call graduated sanctions. You get caught for something silly the first time, the PO can say, oh, I'm going to give you a weekend in jail, right? And basically everybody agreed that that was like a good way to go. We're not talking about someone like robbed a bank. We're talking about you said you were staying here, but it turns out you've been sleeping at your girlfriend's for a month. I'm going to give you a weekend, whatever, right? And it kind of goes up and it's like to 5 days, it goes up to 30 days. So it's like this thing of like, let's try to keep giving you a chance. Maybe you can hold your apartment. Maybe you can hold your car, keep all the clothes you bought, whatever the case may be, the job. And so they want to get rid of that because obviously that was a big problem, right? And so that's going to really fill up jails because as we know, when you're detained awaiting a probation violation, you can be detained for a month just before you even get any kind of hearing. And you're going to be held without bail on a hold. And so all that's going to be like sheriff time. That's all awaiting trial time. Those jails are going to pop. And meanwhile, the Wynn prison, and some of your folks may have been in that particular prison. That place got leased out from the state back to the sheriff for, I believe, $1 million, who then, I'm not sure what the deal was exactly, gave it to LaSalle Corrections, a private runner of jails, who then gave $1 million back to the sheriff, according to the sheriff. That's what he said in the press conference. He got $1 million for it. And then LaSalle is basically running an ICE facility out of that prison. And LaSalle's collecting that $110 a day or whatever for close to 1,500 people. Now they still got some people doing state time who are staying there, and they're still getting paid the per diem for the state person to be held. And that's just like to run the operations, like kitchen, yard crew, whatever. And then meanwhile, they're detaining over 1,000 people detained from, picked up at the border. And that's a state prison being used to make private money. They're pocketing all kinds of loot. And we'll see where that goes, but it just doesn't smell correctly, if you get my drift. So they're like, shrinking the amount of prison beds, overpacking it to then justify building more prison beds, of which of course they want to fill as well. So that stuff is obviously part of our kind of day-to-day mass incarceration, struggle. But I think it's important to think too about some of these other things that feed mass incarceration kind of from the side. And, one of those things would be obviously our education system. And I know a lot of folks are very religious. I'm a very spiritual person myself. But we also know that the founding fathers were on the lookout for state-sponsored religion. They knew that it was a tool to control people, and they knew that we need to keep the government out of religion and keep religion out of government. So this administration is not very good at that at all. Last year it was putting in God We Trust in all the schools. Now they're putting the 10 Commandments in all the schools, something that's already been struck down by the US Supreme Court. It's going to fail, but they believe they can get these things all overturned, kind of like with Roe v. Wade. Like, let's keep on passing unconstitutional laws that we can then fight all the way up to the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, the government, us, the public funds, are paying for those lawyers to fight the things that, our team, our people on the civil rights realm are going to be the lawyers on the other side of it, fighting this thing. All just get back to square one, which is you can't put the 10 Commandments on the wall, but they just want to kind of prove a point. And meanwhile, they don't want you saying anybody's pronoun in there. They don't want any trans kids using a bathroom that they think is not the sort of one you were biologically assigned at birth, so to speak. They really are cracking down on just the sort of right to live peacefully by the LGBTQ community. And they're starting hard in the schools, but it extends out to both the prisons and the homeless shelters in this one particular bill. And then meanwhile, they want to create these voucher programs so that people can basically exit the public schools and take as much money as they can with them and pay to go to, let's just say, a proper religious school rather than the sort of fake one that they keep complaining about. So, bad education, because that's going to leave a lot of folks who, if something costs 10 grand a year and they're willing to give you what, 2 grand, well, you better come up with the other 8 grand, right? Or else your kid ain't going to that school. So, we're going to whittle down public education, try to resegregate the schools and provide no resources, particularly to the low income spaces, going to be primarily Black communities, which is then more likely to feed the prison system as well. Really trying to crack down on immigration as an issue in Louisiana, even though it's not. But trying to like literally pass the bill that is possibly unconstitutional. It is kind of a weird one. It's like, oh, us and the other Gulf states, including Texas and Florida, are going to create like kind of a confederacy. I use that term specifically, of states that will kind of fight immigration. And that's a federal thing. That's also been talked about at the US Supreme Court. Like the feds own immigration. We can't do things around immigration. States can't. So, but again, that's just sort of like a racist talking point. If someone is, 15th generation American, but they look Latino, well, we can pull you over and force you to prove that you're an American, right? There's another bill that got passed, which is just a weird one, where you now have to prove your US citizenship to register to vote. And so a lot of people question, well, how exactly would you prove it? Like clearly a passport is unreasonable, right? They're very expensive. They take a long time to get. Not everyone has one. The wait time is forever. So it would be just like birth certificates. So now basically everyone has to like bring their birth certificate. And it's like, well, if you think I'm lying about my citizenship, well, why wouldn't you think I'm lying about my fake birth certificate too? Right? Like,
So, Bruce, I'm curious about that because my wife and I just had a daughter, and I had this thought about it. Right, like there's the birth certificate and your social security card don't have a picture ID on them.
yeah.
How is somebody supposed to prove that they are that person?
Yeah, and I guess in theory, I mean, the only thing I can imagine that they're going to settle on, and it's probably going to be found, again, unconstitutional, violation of the National Voter Registration Act. But the thing that they might end up settling on, at least in terms of trying before it gets knocked down, which should be just that, where it's like this idea of like, well, you've given us enough things that we think you can't like kind of forge them all, right? Like three forms of, all that kind of stuff. And then they're talking about like this being more voter integrity, right? So on the one hand, they come into this year saying how we're like a top 5, top 10 kind of like election system, which I don't disagree with. And one of the reasons why the last guy, Ardoin, got out of there was he got tired of his right-wing compadres basically keep trying to throw this kind of voter fraud, like election integrity, Trumpism stuff, like in our state where that's just not an issue. So they're always trying to pass new bills, new laws, like trying to like tighten the restrictions, make it super perfectly clean. And it's like, imagine if the NFL every year passed like 10 new rules. You'd be like, I can't even keep up with the game. Like, why? What's wrong with the game? Why do you got to keep tweaking the rules, right? The game is the game. So they keep changing these things, talking about voter integrity. And meanwhile, we had a bill that would allow people who are legally eligible to vote while awaiting trial, who would otherwise be able to cast a ballot, but it's their first vote, so they can't cast it absentee, right? There's a rule against, there's only so many people that can cast it. So all the other ones are reasonable. You're in the military, you're in college, you're disabled, you can cast your first ballot absentee. But if you're awaiting trial, you can't. And so that's clearly a violation of all sorts of the Constitution and the National Voter Registration Act as well. So that's actually something that we have litigation on. So we're suing them on that. And yet they just pretend that it's okay that those folks can't vote. They just don't want to talk about it.
Hello and welcome to From Change to Change. As we wrap up our second season, we always have to be reminded to bring our founder back. But before we get into that, just want to introduce you guys to my wonderful colleagues, Marcus Simmons
Hello,
and
guys.
Matthew Green.
Hello, everybody.
And so we are wrapping up this season, and we have with us our executive director, Mr. Norris Henderson. Very hard man to catch up to, so we have to get him when we can, but he always makes time for us, and we appreciate that because he's very, very busy. And hello and welcome back to From Change to Change. You're not muted.
Oh,
You
okay,
good?
okay. Yeah, it looked on screen like I was muted. I'm looking at the mic saying green, but on the screen saying muted. No, glad to be back. Glad to be able to kind of like stop a minute to jump in. Yeah, I wish I could have actually been in person, but with just so much stuff going on today. around the office with the court case in Baton Rouge and different stuff. So I'm like, well, best thing to be in one spot. At least I'm sitting still long enough to be able to accommodate somebody today, you know?
Yes,
And
yes,
so it's
and
kind of exciting too that, you know, we ended season 2, you know, it's like
yes.
that's growing, you know, that's growing, you know. I just need to see whether or not we're gonna be syndicated sooner or later, you know?
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know how many seasons it takes for that, but you know, but it's a good start that if we're around, that means we got content that we're putting out in the community that people are enjoying and which is good. That's the rule, you know, to educate people, and this is a healthy medium to do it in, you know. Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. And we love being able to go into people's homes in the comfort of their homes. It's nothing like that. So, um, you know, like I said, today we're just trying to kind of recap the past 6 months. So that's kind of like the beginning of a certain one's administration. And what has that been looking like over the past 6 months? Um, and we'll move from that point.
Well, it's been challenging. I mean, challenging to say the least. When you start off a session where a new governor comes in and within 10 days roll back almost like 25, 30 years of progression, when the numbers didn't even justify the behavior. You know, crime is already at a low here in Louisiana, but crime sells, fear sells. And
Hmm.
so their platform was selling fear, and they got people to buy into it. So they went to the legislature and within 10 days done all these drastic things that they don't even have the data to prove it out, you know. And so, you know, the biggest thing about this, the lesson learned for them is going to come real quick and harsh because they won't be able to afford the changes that they're trying to do. And when you talk about stopping people from earning good time, was the good time credits that is the kind of like control mechanism for the people inside corrections to run the facility smoothly. If the person realized I can't make parole, I can't earn good time, what's the sense of me doing anything? What's the sense of me going to work? What's the sense of me doing anything? And then the repercussion from that becomes everything shuts down, and then you realize that, oh, wait a minute, this was an unintended consequence. And I think one of the real challenges is that nobody took time enough to to listen at people offering up information about it. And the most striking thing for me was the fact that the Department of Corrections was really instrumental in all the justice reinvestment stuff. And when it came down to defending their work, they didn't do it. You know, they just like, well, this is what the government wants. I'm like, well, that can be to y'all detriment because you're not thinking about the people who work in that environment that's under your control. That you know, what's their position? Nobody asked them how you feel about taking good time away from people, or people not able to make parole. You know, one of the wardens would always say, I don't want to be a warden in a prison where nobody's going home. And that's kind of like the environment that they're starting to create all across the state. And with the population decreasing almost, you know, in half, that you're about to ramp this thing right back up where Louisiana going to lead the nation per capita incarceration all over again, if not next for the next 10 or 20 years. If something don't come, some intervention don't come along the way. If somebody don't wake up and realize that we made a mistake, you know. I mean, some things may have needed tweaking, but not just totally dismantling. And I think that's where they just went their overreach to doing these things to kind of try to send a message that, oh, we're going to be tough on this. Yeah, but the people in prison, they may have created something or violated some violation to get them there, But during COVID, when you say crime was rapid, it wasn't these people that was misbehaving. They were trying to survive. They were trying to stay alive inside your environment where you were supposed to be protecting them. So, it is what it is right now. And at the end of the day, folks just have to educate themselves about these processes so they can be better prepared when stuff come up like this and people start complaining that something is broke. Somebody can easily say it's not broken. We don't need to fix it.
Norris, you brought up a lot of good points about a term I've heard a lot recently, collateral consequences. A lot of the consequences are going to be sort of down the road. And it may not even be when the current administration or people are in office anymore. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit because vote is on the forefront of many of these fights. I was wondering if you could talk about two of those areas that it seems like people haven't looked at. One is the humanitarian consequences of having more people in jails and not getting out. But then also, we hear oftentimes at the legislature, and I was watching on TV or there many times this session, we hear about the finances, how much it's going to cost people, and how much that's going to go up. So I was wondering if you could talk about a little bit about what this means for the humanitarian side of it, the consequences, and then also what it's going to cost people.
Well, and they go hand in hand because the humanitarian side of it is that they finally got the population down to whereas they almost could manage their budget. And this is the thing about it is that folks are aging in prison every day. The older they get, the more expensive it is to keep them. Healthcare, I mean, they just lost a lawsuit about the quality of healthcare that they complain about. We can't do it. Just lost the lawsuit around the conditions on death row dealing with the heat. There's litigation pending as we speak around people working outdoors in inclement weather. And so all those are costs associated with it. But one of the things, if you notice, during the legislative session, especially the special session, there were no fiscal notes to none of the bills. They just force paid everybody. So he wasn't concerned about what this is going to cost, even in human costs or either financial costs. But it's going to cost in both. Because as people start getting ill, you got to spend more money to take care of them. And at the end of the day, it's like, where the money going to come from? I mean, this is a poor state. This is a poor state. This is not like the 70s where the oil and gas industry was booming. And y'all know it firsthand. Y'all in Earl City. And you can see the dramatic turnaround from what that booming community looked like 30, 40 years ago, the way it looks like today. And so, this pie in the sky thing, we can other people, and as long as we're othering people, nobody really cares. But when like the old commercial used to come on, pay me now, pay me later. And so I think this is a case where when the bill comes later, it's going to be that sticker shock. And the tragic part about it is that the people who's going to be left holding the bill isn't the people who actually put this thing in motion. They'll all be gone. They'll all be gone. They either be term limited or they'll have to answer to their constituents about, like staying in Ollie. A fine mess you didn't got me into Ollie. So that's what it's going to boil down to at the end of the day is that when people start getting the receipts for all these things that they want to do. I mean, because I'm like, okay, if you're in parole, get rid of the parole board. What you need parole boards for? What you need a pardon boards for? If nobody can make parole, and this is, and you don't want to do this, what do you need this entity for? Get rid of it. So why are you appointing people to a board that nobody's coming in? The people already in, although it's not retroactive, the chances of people making parole when you're appointing people to the board who one of the members of the board was the same person who said during justice reinvestment, oh, you're taking all our good prisoners. We're going to wash our cars and, cook our food. So now the person who comes before you, who is this Class A trustee, been a Class A trustee for 20 years, and he run some particular operation inside the prison, the mindset is like, oh, this is one of the good ones. We can't let this one go. And so the cost is kind of like, I think you would think that the combination of the humanistic side of it and the financial side of it would then, I talked to several legislators and former legislators at different events, and it was like, oh, they'll come to this sense in about a year and a half. But they may have done so much damage in a year and a half that it may take us 5 to 10 years to kind of like peel our way back out of it. So yeah, so I'm just hopeful that we can continue to educate people to start questioning it about, well, what happened to the money that was supposed to be for this? Because now we're spending it on that. And it's kind of tragic that the FBI report came out after the session ended. But even when people were offering up information and statistical data, empirical data about what the state of Louisiana was like, we wasn't no different than every state in the union during COVID, where there was this uptick. And but once that subsided, everything started trailing off again. But we wanted to kind of like rush, be the first ones. We want to be first in everything that everybody else wants to be last in, and last in everything that everybody's climbing, trying to be first in. So, it's just that mentality that we have. And it's kind of like these folks in this session, this legislative session, wasn't about, they keep saying, well, my constituent. And all I kept saying here was, this is what the governor wants. This is what the governor wants. Well, you're supposed to be a partner with the governor, not working for the governor. And so I think it's going to come, these chickens will come home to roost.
I really appreciate you saying and talking about how it may take multiple years to undo it, and that you'll see it down the line, because where they're taking the money from are going to be things like education, and then you're going to see the consequences in education down the line. Things like energy infrastructure, things like helping prevent sort of the infrastructure in hurricanes, all the things that are vitally important for people's livelihoods. I was wondering, we have some time left. How does Louisiana connect to the larger picture of what's going on in the nation right now with criminal justice reform, and what's going on in Louisiana and what's happening across the US?
Well, several years ago, everybody looked to Louisiana because, we're not one of these states that's a battleground state. And some folks looked and said, well, they can't get nothing done in Louisiana. Just cast them aside. But then during 2015, 16, 17, when they start seeing all the movement, justice for investment stuff, like the saying goes, so goes the South, so goes the rest of this country. And people start seeing progress, not just in Louisiana, but in Oklahoma, in Mississippi, in Alabama, all across the deep South. And that was promised. And then you have this one election cycle that wants to take everybody back, and is under the same mantra that let's make America great. Well, America was great when they had free labor. That's when America was great. And so they don't want to call that. That's when they had slavery and they had free labor. And so that's how America became great, on the backs of other people. And so when they see the South starting to rise up, it's like, oh, Katie bought the dough. We can't go. So what they do, they go to kind of like the scare tactic. I can't go outside my door. I can't do this. What we got to do? We got to start locking more people up. And what happened? What it contributes to? It contributes to, again, this free labor cottage of people doing free labor. They justify by saying they give them incentive wages, but that's slavery, because you're not paying them the wages that they would actually earn in the society. And so I think one of the things too is when you look at the mean spiritedness of people, when you have to listen at people, and it goes back to the human side, that here's the federal government want to drop a boatload of money to feed children during the summer, and you refuse to take the money. That's free money. So what are you saying to your so-called constituents or to their children, because the children can't vote. So you're literally talking to them saying, I don't care nothing about you and your children. Because that program is to feed kids during the summer. And so when you look at the folks, how they're pushing back against climate change, nobody wants to acknowledge that we're losing ground every day. And when you look at these weather events, the way this weather is coming up on us every day, and I looked at that map this morning, I was like, man, this stuff is coming. This coming like every other day. There's something coming. We can't stand another weather event across the South. We just can't. I mean, because the people who are in charge of fixing this, to me, don't seem to have a clue. They really just don't. They don't seem to have a clue because the years that we've been blessed to not have a sustained weather event, we haven't done anything to fortify, what we're doing. Every year they talk about we want to collect Christmas trees. There are some states that grow pine trees. If you want to do that, just buy the pine trees from another state, bring them back and put them out there and let kind of like this stuff building up the reefs again. It's not rocket science. But it's not like until something happened that then it becomes urgent and important. And so I think the more we can educate the real constituents about what these folks are doing and how they are able to do it, because it's just a core group of them. And so hopefully during this redistricting process that we can kind of like get some more alignment, break up this super majority that they got, this go along and get along thing they got, that we might can start making some inroads and getting some people. And I'm kind of happy that some of the folks in the Senate started pushing back at some of the ideas that the governor was floating around. The Constitution Convention, you want to call one, but don't want to say what it's for. Wasn't something that you campaigned on. So it's kind of like you blindsiding people. So, I think our biggest job is to continue to educate people in our communities about what is the residual impact on them in their lives. All these things is like, okay, are you in the safe for today? Or is your dollar valued at any more than it was valued 6 months ago? John Bell came in a deficit, raised, got us out of the deficit, raised a whole bunch of money, and it's almost like we broke again. Almost like we broke again. You kind of like can approve this budget, but you're kind of like basing that upon what? Where it's coming from. No industries are really coming in because why? You're killing the educational, our folks are cycling out. They're going to school and what they're doing. I got to get out here. I got to go find me a job somewhere. I'm going to another state. So it's kind of like academic drain on the state to start with. And so nobody wants to come in. It's like I'm reading the paper right now and they're saying the folks in the rural area of Louisiana trying to expand internet. This is 2024 America. And we still trying to expand internet? Really? You see what I'm saying? So that's how far off the grid we are in a sense of doing the basic thing. So that means if our kids will live in these rural areas, they're being deprived of a whole bunch of stuff because they don't have access to technology. So how can a company wants to come in that's tech-based, who's going to run their place? Nobody in the city has a clue what the internet does, So it's a little bitty thing. I think if people start really questioning some of the things and stop listening at these 30-second sound bites, that they'll be all right. Just take time to kind of like start when you go to the grocery store, and you can't blame the people in Washington about all this stuff because it was the folks in Washington, the Democrats in all Washington, that pushed all the money into the community during COVID. The Republicans didn't want that. They didn't want that. The Democrats done that, pushed all that money down to the people, really our money, because our taxpayer money, push it down to the ground so people can kind of like get themselves back together. The Republicans, they bailed out the banks and everybody else in the automobile industry. But when it came to the regular common people, they was totally against the COVID relief packages, you know? So we have to really kind of like educate people about these dynamics, you know, about what's actually going on and like the cost of insurance. Sooner or later, nobody can be able to insure their house. And what happens? A bad weather event comes, and then we sure enough gonna be SOL. You know, we're gonna have a house, but we're gonna have a property with nothing on it because we can't afford the insurance. So as opposed to them, the guy campaign, we're gonna do something with the insurance. And what happens? So now we're going, you give the insurance company the ability to kick me to the curb after 3 years if they're just not pleased with me. Or they won't have to kick most people to the curb because most people are just going to abandon them because they don't have the money to pay the premium. You know, so it's these things, these everyday things that we have to steady keep reminding people about. This is the impact. Sometimes people don't see the impact. They just say, oh, they're past that. That don't affect me. But they don't see how it affects them until it actually affects them, you know? And sometimes by that time, it's like, you know, as if you would have, should have, you know? So I think it's even more for us to kind of like, and with From Change to Change program, this is one way to get information out to the community where people can hear stuff. And you don't have to take nobody's word on this show. Well, I can't say that for everybody because the people in rural Louisiana can't go jump on the internet. But other folks who got access to the internet, they can go on the internet and you can fact check this stuff about what's going on. And so nationally, all this stuff, they are mimicking each other. We see crazy stuff go down in one state, and it's like, oh, let's see, can we do the same thing? They're trying to out tough each other. You know, when we talk about, you know, because we do a lot of voter engagement and civic engagement with folks, and you see how they have been trying to make it challenging for folks to vote and register to vote and stuff like that. And then one person gets convicted, and then all of a sudden they want to ensure that this person has his right to vote. You know, that this formerly incarcerated person has their right to vote in a state where they're denied 1.5 million people their right to vote by putting all the different impediments in front of them about fines and fees and everything else. But they're showing this person, oh, you're going to have the right to vote. Now, the only way you get his right to vote is you give him a pardon. So you're going to set up a pardon hearing from him where people have been waiting 10, 11, 12 years waiting to get that hearing to see whether or not they can get their franchise right back. So we have to pay attention to all these things and show consistently what's going on across this country. But everything starts at home. Everything is hyper local. We have to take care of this stuff on the local before we kind of like move outside of this. And so if we can do that, I think we'll be all right, you know?
Yes, yes, definitely. This time goes by too fast. Every time I'm like, I could just listen to Nars talk all day and just lose
Well,
track of
one of the
time.
things about this too, and this was saying like what Matthew was saying too, the fact that these folks have targeted so many people. They've targeted Black and brown people. They've targeted the LGBT community. They've targeted the libraries with censorship. And so, you know, you tell people and you hear the old thing that when they came for me, well, they didn't, I wasn't a carpenter, so they didn't come for me. I wasn't a carpenter. So they're trying to bust up the unions, you know? And so it's like people starting to see now. So we got to collectivize these stories that all we got is each other. And if we don't pull together against the evil empire, you see what I'm saying? They would destroy us all. And so they're trying to do this divide and conquer. The headline of the paper is about Louisiana is kind of like becoming anti-women with all of the things that they're doing against women. And it's like these women need to realize and wake up. It's like, wait a minute. If y'all don't stand up and fight for yourself, you can't ask nobody to help you. You know, you got to help me help you. And that goes to every category, the LGBT community. You can't stand in the trenches by yourself. You got to kind of like align yourself with somebody else. The teachers who've been trying to get the Southern average on wages for years, ever since I was a kid, you know, and this fell, what they call it, this charter school thing, you know, all these things where you just really, and now you want to take the money from the public schools and give to people so they can send their children to private school.